You eat breakfast. An hour later, you're hungry again. You blame willpower. You blame your metabolism. You blame getting older. But here's what almost nobody has explained to you. The problem was never how much you ate. It was what kind of protein you ate, and most of what's on your plate digests faster than you think. There's a specific number that should genuinely surprise you. One particular protein, found in one very ordinary food most of us grew up seeing in the fridge, releases into your bloodstream slowly, steadily, for up to 7 hours after you eat it. Compare that to most fast-digesting proteins, which clear your system in 1 to 2 hours, leaving you hungry again before lunch even arrives. That food is cottage cheese, and the reason it behaves so differently in your body has nothing to do with marketing or trends. It comes down to a specific type of protein called casein, and how it physically behaves once it hits your stomach. Here's the number that matters most. A single cup of cottage cheese provides roughly 25 grams of complete protein. Complete meaning it contains all 9 essential amino acids your body can't make on its own. And within that 25 grams sits about 2.5 grams of a specific amino acid called leucine, comfortably clearing the threshold researchers have identified as the trigger point for muscle protein synthesis, the process your body uses to build and maintain muscle. This isn't a case of one food burning fat through some magic mechanism. It's simpler and more honest than that. Slower digestion, longer fullness, real, measurable effects on the hormones that tell your brain you're satisfied. Hormones called GLP-1 and PYY, which clinical research shows rise measurably after eating high-protein dairy and which directly reduce how much you eat at your next meal. If you want health information explained the way it should be, clearly, honestly, and without anything left out, subscribe and tap like. That is how kingvitalyears reaches more people who need this. Today I'm going to explain exactly why casein protein behaves so differently from other proteins, walk you through what's happening with your hunger hormones when you eat it, show you the specific muscle preservation angle that matters most after 50, and give you real, practical ways to use this at mealtimes. Stay with me. Let's start with the mechanism, because once you understand it, you'll never look at a snack the same way again. Think of protein digestion like 2 different ways of pouring water into a bucket with a small leak in the bottom. Fast-digesting protein is like dumping the whole bucket in at once, a big surge, most of which is used immediately or lost, with the bucket running dry again within an hour or 2. Slow-digesting protein is like a steady drip from a hose, continuously topping off the bucket for hours, so it never fully empties. Cottage cheese's protein is roughly 80% casein, and casein has a very specific, almost mechanical property. The moment it meets the acidic environment of your stomach, it curdles and forms a gel-like structure. That gel physically slows down how quickly your digestive system can break it apart and absorb the amino acids inside it. This isn't a theory. It's been directly measured in research comparing casein to fast-digesting proteins like whey, which is found in most protein shakes and many protein bars. Whey protein spikes amino acids in your bloodstream quickly, then clears within about 1 to 2 hours. Casein does the opposite, a slower rise, but a release that continues steadily for up to 7 hours. Here's why that matters for how you actually feel throughout your day. That steady 7-hour release means your body has a continuous, small supply of amino acids and a sustained sense of fullness, instead of a sharp spike followed by a crash that leaves you reaching for something else an hour later. You can try this right now, while you're watching, not the experiment itself, just the observation. Think back to the last time you had a fast snack, like crackers or a granola bar. How long until you felt hungry again? Now think about the last time you had a slower, protein-rich meal. Hold that comparison in mind. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly why that difference exists, down to the hormones responsible for it. Now let's talk about the hunger hormones themselves, because this is where the science gets genuinely interesting. Your sense of fullness isn't just a vague feeling, it's driven by specific chemical signals your gut sends to your brain. 2 of the most important ones are called GLP-1 and PYY. Think of these hormones like a dimmer switch connected to your appetite, rather than an on-off switch. When your gut detects certain nutrients, especially protein, it releases GLP-1 and PYY into your bloodstream. Those hormones travel to your brain and essentially turn down the intensity of your hunger signal. The more sustained that release, the longer that dimmer switch stays turned down. Clinical research on high-protein dairy foods has measured exactly this effect. Studies tracking GLP-1 and PYY levels after eating high-protein dairy found measurable increases in both hormones, along with reduced total calorie intake at the next meal compared to lower protein options. This is why a slow-digesting high-protein food doesn't just feel more filling in the moment, It actually changes how much you eat hours later through a real, measurable hormonal mechanism. This connects directly to something a lot of people over 50 experience without understanding why: the 3 p.m. crash. You eat lunch. It feels reasonable at the time. And by mid-afternoon, you're hungry again, maybe reaching for something sweet, maybe blaming a slow metabolism or just getting older. But here's what's actually happening in a lot of these cases. If lunch was built around fast-digesting carbohydrates and proteins, that GLP-1 and PYY signal spikes and fades quickly, sometimes within an hour or two. Your body's dimmer switch on hunger flips back up, and you feel genuinely, physically hungry again, well before your next planned meal. It's not a willpower failure. It's a hormone signal doing exactly what it's designed to do when it's not given a slow, steady source of protein to sustain it. Let me walk you through a real pattern I see often. Eleanor Vance, 63, retired paralegal from Richmond, Virginia. She'd been trying to manage her weight for years, doing what she thought was right: a light breakfast, a sensible lunch, and yet by 3 p.m. most days, she was in the office break room reaching for pretzels or a cookie, telling herself it was a lack of discipline. What was actually happening was straightforward once you look at the mechanism. Her breakfast and lunch were built mostly around fast-digesting foods: toast, fruit, a turkey sandwich, nutritious choices, but ones that cleared her system within an hour or two, taking her satiety hormones down with them. When she swapped her afternoon snack from pretzels to a cup of cottage cheese with a handful of berries, the 3 p.m. crash didn't just get smaller. Within about 2 weeks, it had largely disappeared. Same effort, same intention, just a different digestion curve doing the work for her instead of against her. How old are you? Leave your age in the comments below. It genuinely shapes what I cover next and helps me make these videos more useful for exactly where you are. Now let's talk about the second major piece of this: muscle preservation, because this matters more after 50 than most people realize, and it connects directly back to that leucine number I mentioned earlier. Starting in your 30s, and accelerating notably after 60, your body naturally loses muscle mass over time if that loss isn't actively countered. This process is sometimes called sarcopenia, and it's a quiet, gradual decline, one that affects strength, balance, metabolism, and independence over the years. Here's the piece most people never hear: your body doesn't build or maintain muscle continuously throughout the day. It needs a specific trigger, delivered at a high enough dose, to switch on a process called muscle protein synthesis, essentially the biological machinery that repairs and builds muscle tissue. That trigger is an amino acid called leucine, and a systematic review published in Frontiers in Nutrition has identified a specific threshold, roughly 2 to 3 grams of leucine in a single sitting, with older adults typically needing the higher end of that range, needed to meaningfully switch that process on. Switch that process on. Below that threshold, the signal is often too weak to trigger much of a response, regardless of how much total protein you technically ate that day. This is exactly where cottage cheese does something genuinely useful. 1 cup provides roughly 2.5 grams of leucine, comfortably within that 2 to 3 gram trigger zone, combined with a slow, sustained amino acid release that keeps feeding that muscle-building process for hours rather than delivering it all at once and then stopping. Think of it like a construction crew that needs a minimum number of workers on site to actually start building, and then needs a steady supply of materials delivered throughout the day to keep working. Too few workers, and nothing gets built, no matter how many materials show up later. A steady materials delivery, paired with enough workers to start, is what actually gets the job done. This is also why the timing of when you eat cottage cheese matters, and there's a specific angle here that research particularly supports for older adults: eating a slow-digesting, leucine-rich protein like cottage cheese in the evening, closer to bedtime. Here's why that timing matters. Overnight, while you sleep, your body goes 7 to 8 hours without any nutrient intake, a long stretch where muscle protein synthesis has nothing to work with unless something slow-releasing is already in your system. A casein-based food eaten before bed continues supplying amino acids through much of that overnight window, supporting muscle maintenance during the exact hours your body would otherwise be running on empty. A randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of Nutrition, studying healthy older men, found that protein ingested before sleep was properly digested overnight and measurably increased overnight muscle protein synthesis rates compared to a placebo. Overnight muscle protein synthesis rates compared to no evening protein at all. This isn't a minor detail. For adults over 50 actively trying to preserve muscle and strength, closing that overnight gap is one of the more practical, low-effort tools available. You can try this right now, or rather, tonight. If your current routine has you going straight from dinner to bed with nothing in between, that overnight window is currently unsupported. A small serving of cottage cheese before bed is a simple way to change that. Now let's address something honestly, because I promised at the start of this video that I wouldn't oversell this. Cottage cheese is not a magic fat-burning food. Nothing you eat melts fat through some hidden mechanism, and if a video ever tells you that, that's a red flag, not a discovery. What cottage cheese actually does is more modest and more real. It changes the digestion curve and hormone response compared to faster digesting alternatives, which translates into fewer cravings, steadier energy, and better support for muscle maintenance. That's the honest science, and it's genuinely useful without needing to be exaggerated. It's also worth being clear about something else. Not all cottage cheese is created equal for this purpose. Here's what to actually look for. Choose plain, minimally processed cottage cheese over flavored varieties, which often add significant sugar that blunts some of the metabolic benefit. Look at the protein content on the label. It should land close to that 24 to 25 gram range per cup for full-fat or low-fat versions. Some ultra-low-fat versions dilute the protein content more than people expect, so the label is worth checking rather than assuming. If you're managing sodium intake, be aware that cottage cheese tends to run higher in sodium than many other dairy products. Lower sodium versions exist and are worth seeking out if that's a concern for you personally. This is exactly the kind of detail worth a quick conversation with your doctor if you're managing blood pressure. Now, let's get practical about how to actually use this. The most direct swap is replacing a fast-digesting snack with cottage cheese. If your typical afternoon snack is crackers, a granola bar, or fruit eaten alone, try replacing it with a half cup to full cup of plain cottage cheese. Fruit alone, while healthy, is mostly fast-digesting carbohydrate with very little protein to slow it down. Pairing it with cottage cheese changes that digestion curve substantially. A well-balanced version of this snack pairs cottage cheese with fruit or vegetables. Berries, sliced peaches, cucumber, or cherry tomatoes work well. This combines the slow protein release with fiber and micronutrients, extending fullness even further and rounding out the nutritional profile. For the evening application we just discussed, a smaller serving, around half a cup, eaten an hour or so before bed is generally sufficient to support that overnight muscle maintenance window, without requiring a large meal right before sleep. Let me walk you through one more real pattern, because it shows how this plays out over a longer stretch of time, not just a single afternoon. Frank Delgado, 66, retired high school teacher from Tucson, Arizona. After a health scare with his blood pressure 2 years earlier, Frank had been trying to lose weight and hold on to the muscle he still had, worried about the kind of frailty he'd watched his own father go through in his late 70s. Frank was already doing a lot right, walking most days, cutting back on processed food. But he described a pattern of being hungry all the time, snacking constantly on things like pretzels and fruit, and feeling like his effort wasn't translating into results. He'd also noticed his grip felt weaker opening jars, something he chalked up to arthritis. When he restructured his snacks around cottage cheese, a mid-morning serving with fruit, and a smaller evening serving before bed, the constant hunger was the first thing to change, within about a week and a half. Over the following 2 months, alongside his existing walking routine, he reported feeling noticeably stronger during his daily activities, and a follow-up conversation with his doctor confirmed his weight had moved in the right direction without the constant sense of restriction he'd been fighting before. What changed wasn't willpower. It was giving his body a steady, sustained protein source instead of a series of short spikes and crashes throughout the day. The same mechanism we've walked through this entire video, just applied consistently over time. I want to reinforce something important here, because it matters for anyone managing a health condition. If you have kidney disease, are on a protein-restricted diet, or have any condition where protein intake needs to be carefully managed, cottage cheese and any change to your protein intake should be discussed with your doctor first. What's genuinely helpful for most people isn't automatically appropriate for every individual medical situation, and this video is describing general research findings, not personalized medical advice. Let's also address one more honest limitation. The 7-hour digestion window and the satiety hormone research I've described come from controlled studies, and individual responses can vary based on your overall diet, activity level, other health conditions, and medications. This isn't a guarantee that you personally will feel full for exactly 7 hours every time. It's a description of the underlying mechanism and the general pattern research has found, genuinely useful information, but not a promise. Let's bring this together. Cottage cheese isn't special because of marketing or trend. It's special because roughly 80% of its protein is casein, which forms a gel in your stomach and releases amino acids slowly for up to 7 hours, compared to the 1 to 2 hours most fast-digesting proteins last. That slow release keeps satiety hormones like GLP-1 and PYY elevated longer, genuinely reducing how much you eat later in the day. And with about 2.5 grams of leucine per cup, it clears the threshold your body needs to actively trigger muscle protein synthesis, a real advantage for muscle maintenance, especially in the evening, when that steady release can support your body through the overnight hours it would otherwise go without. Here's what to do tonight. Step 1. Swap tomorrow's fast-digesting snack, crackers, a granola bar, or fruit alone, for a serving of plain cottage cheese, and notice how long the fullness actually lasts compared to your usual snack. Step 2. Pair it with fruit or vegetables for a more balanced, longer-lasting option. Step 3. If you're actively working on muscle maintenance or strength, try a small serving about an hour before bed and give it a few weeks to notice any difference. Step 4. If you manage kidney disease, blood pressure, or any condition involving protein or sodium restriction, bring this up with your doctor before making it a regular habit, so it fits safely into your specific situation. If you've noticed constant hunger, afternoon crashes, or a sense that your effort toward better eating isn't translating into results, that's worth mentioning to your doctor or a registered dietitian, not something to keep working around with willpower alone. Everything covered today is for educational purposes only. Your health picture is specific to you, and the most useful thing you can do with this information is bring it to a doctor who knows your full history, not replace that conversation with a YouTube video. If this gave you something your doctor never had time to explain, subscribe to King Vital Years. Hit like so this reaches more people who need it. And tell me in the comments, what's your usual afternoon snack, and would you try swapping it? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next video.